And there's still a lot of questions. How many more of these sites will be discovered? For more on a very difficult discussion, I'm joined by Dr. Kisha Supernant, who is director at the Institute of Prairie and Indigenous Archaeology at the University of Alberta. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Kisha, I want to begin with your reaction to this. Obviously, you've been following this for some time in your team, and you've been also receiving a lot of requests and inquiries. So can you give us an overview of what you've been following when it comes to the technology, when it comes to discovering these unmarked graves?
Yes, I mean, I think every time we hear these stories from any school, it is very heartbreaking. But for myself and my team, it's not shocking, as it's not for many Indigenous peoples as well. And I think that's because we have been using this sort of ground penetrating radar technology on behalf of Indigenous communities to find unmarked graves for some time, both around residential schools and in other locations. And it is a very difficult process to undertake, but it is also very important to be able to relocate these unmarked graves that communities often know are out there and that exist.
Kisha, indeed, this requires funding. The federal government committing $27.1 million and hearing that they will commit more. Is that enough? Will that be enough? Because indeed, this is going to be for years that you and your team and others across our country will be looking at these sites.
Yes, I think it was hopeful to hear that the government is willing to commit more than what has already been committed, because it will not be enough. Because many schools are at different stages along this kind of journey. So some are ready to hit the ground soon with the ground penetrating radar and other technologies should they choose to do so. Other communities are really just starting the conversation about what this will mean for them, coming together with elders and survivors and the different nations around any given school. And I think it's really essential that these resources are available, both funding, but also technical expertise and guidance around what the options are to do this research, because there's a lot of information in archives and historical documents, and then there's also the application of these technologies to the actual ground themselves.
You mentioned just a few factors here, Kisha. How difficult is it to do the work that you do?
It can be very difficult. I mean, there's the challenges on the kind of technical research side, but also the emotional side. This is very heartbreaking work, as we see in seeing the emotional outpouring around the different schools that have had these large numbers of children buried around them. Although even one grave of a child around a school is a tragedy and is horrific. And so I think ensuring that there are supports for survivors and families, but also for the people who are doing the work on the ground, people like myself and my team, ensuring that there's spiritual, cultural, and mental health supports, because it is extremely devastating to walk over the graves of children.
Indeed, and we are putting up these phone numbers here because it is troubling, it is traumatizing, and I can't even imagine what it's like for you on the ground. Have you been part of any of these searches that we have seen as of late in Kamloops at all, Cowessess?
I have not been involved in the ones in Kamloops or Cowessess, but I have worked at the Muskowgan Indian Residential School site in Saskatchewan. And then we've also had many Indigenous communities reaching out to us at the Institute for advice and guidance and for potentially partnering. And so we do anticipate that we will both provide an advisory role, but we will also be on the ground as much as we can. We have limited capacity, and capacity is a real challenge because there are only so many people who understand how to apply this technology to find unmarked graves. And so we're hoping that there'll be a national conversation ensuring that we're coordinating across people doing this work and that it's being done to the same high standard.
Sadly, we are hearing estimations upwards of 6,000 potentially unmarked graves to be discovered. Is this what you are anticipating across Canada?
I actually think it will be more than that. I think based on what we've seen so far, that the numbers in the missing children register for the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation are just over 4,100 right now. And I suspect that we will see, certainly in the thousands and potentially over 10,000 or more unmarked graves that are associated with residential schools, because there's 139 that were part of the TRC, and each school, I'm sure, has unmarked graves around it. And then there's a bunch of schools that may also have unmarked graves that were not formally part of the TRC process, boarding schools and day schools and other areas that also really need to be searched. So there's a lot more yet to come.
Dr. Supernant, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We'll continue to follow this story for you here through BT. I want to bring in Stephanie Henry now, who's watching some big problems here at home. Eastbound 401. Steph, what are you watching?